A woman who spent the last 3 months in jail after police mistook the candy floss at the back of her car for crystal meth is suing the county in Georgia, which kept her incarcerated. Dasha Fincher missed the birth of 2 of her grandchildren while she was inside, and it took the authorities 3 months to test the candy floss, discover that it wasn't crystal meth. She's now suing for damages and is being represented by James Freeman. Hello, Mr. Freeman.
Hello, how are you doing?
Very good. This is an extraordinary tale. How does this start? One hot day, 2 policemen are walking by your client's car. Something like that?
Very close. My client was a passenger in a car riding down the road. 2 officers decided to pull the car over because they said there was illegal window tint. There's a certain darkness level that it has to be. And after they pulled the car over and decided, in fact, the tint was not illegal, they asked if they could search the car. And the driver and my client, who was the passenger, didn't have a problem with that because they didn't think there was anything in the car. And after a pretty exhaustive search, about 20 minutes, they found a bag of cotton candy, large, clear, open plastic bag with a ball about the size of a baseball that was cotton candy, light blue in color.
Good. Blue, what we would call candy floss. Good heavens. Was that, in fact, an illegal search?
Well, it depends. We've contended in the lawsuit that the very stop from the beginning was what we would call pretextual, meaning they didn't really have a reason to pull them over. They used the excuse that there was a window tint violation when, in fact, there wasn't, which leads us to believe that the officers really just wanted to pull this car over and kind of didn't have a good cause for that. Once the car was stopped and they didn't have a violation, they should have let them go. Instead, they insisted that they wanted to search the car, and they had the consent of the driver, so they went forward. The roadside stop, as I said, we have a videotape of the whole thing from the dash cam of the sheriff's officers, and you can see both of the occupants of the vehicle standing back talking to one of the officers as another one goes, and they're just as relaxed as can be. And when the cotton candy comes out, they're very nonchalant that that's cotton candy, and he just tosses it on the trunk of the car. Short time later, he decides
tell us about the chemistry here. I mean, what would this blue candy floss actually look like? I mean, how could it be mistaken for crystal meth?
Well, my gut tells me that somebody had watched too many episodes of an American show we had called Breaking Bad, which involved blue meth as the primary. One of the main characters, I guess you could say, was blue meth. In reality, I've talked to officers and to experts who tell me there is no such thing as the blue meth from Breaking Bad. In its normal state, methamphetamine would be off-white, white in color, very much like dirty sugar. It's very crystallized, or it's a fine powder. The fact that, as you call it, candy floss, which would reduce down to about the size of a ball, just doesn't make sense. That's part of what our lawsuit's contending, that a reasonable officer would not have thought this was methamphetamine. And the fact that they did is part of the problem.
Yeah. How was it tested?
Well, that's one of the other problems. The officers around here use what's called a roadside test kit. It's a $2, very small, fits in the palm of your hand, plastic bag that has 3 clear vials of liquid. Those 3 liquids, when broken in the proper order with the substance, a sample of the substance placed in it, will react chemically, and if there are no drugs, they will turn red in color, the 3 liquids will. If there is methamphetamine, I'm told that it would turn purple in color. Of course, the problem I have with that test, especially in this circumstance, is you had a blue substance being tested, and we all know red and blue makes purple. So I don't know if the red result combined with the blue substance to cause a purple result. I don't know if the test itself was flawed and said meth when in fact it was simply sugar, or I don't know if the officer simply looked at the color and came up with the wrong decision as to what the color was. That's one of the big issues that we're seeing across the state and in other jurisdictions as to whether or not these $2 test kits should be the basis for sending a person to jail.
How come she wasn't that? I mean, if they took her back, intending to charge her or something, how come that she wasn't represented at that point by someone who said, well, clearly you got this one wrong. Let's do a proper test now and send her on her way?
Well, I would call this a comedy of errors if it wasn't so tragic. She had what was called a preliminary hearing, which is where they would set a bond amount to be able to release her from jail if she could come up with the bond. Unfortunately, at the preliminary hearing, she was given a public defender who I'm sure was very competent, but the only officer to testify at that hearing was a trainee officer. Out of the two officers that were present, the one who actually performed the test was not the one who testified in court. It was instead his trainee who watched everything and who even testified on the stand that he had no training in drug recognition. He testified that the test performed as it was supposed to and resulted in a positive reading. The judge, not knowing there was a problem with that, set bail at an unusually high amount, I think, but given the size of the candy floss, as you call it, if that was methamphetamine, that large quantity was all methamphetamine, maybe this bond would have been appropriate. But $1 million cash bond is what the judge came up with. And that means she couldn't put up a house or a property or something worth $1 million. She had to have $1 million cash, which she simply did not have access to. So her only option was to sit in jail while the chemical was sent off to the state crime lab to be analyzed. Unfortunately, the state crime lab took almost 3 months to do their analysis. And by the time the results came back, she was arrested on New Year's Eve, December 31st. The crime lab issued their report on March 22nd. Unfortunately, there was still about another 2-week delay. She wasn't actually released from jail until April the 2nd. And that's when her her public defender found out the test result and got her back in front of a judge, and they released her at that point. So it was just a tragic comedy of errors that led to where she was.
And did Mrs. Fisher, what sort of things did she miss? I mean, we already said she missed the birth of 2 grandchildren when she was inside.
3 months in jail is unimaginable for most people. Her 3 months, as I said, just continued to pile up. She had a daughter-in-law who was pregnant with twins and gave birth to twin boys while she was in jail. She had planned on being present in that delivery room, helping the daughter-in-law as a birthing coach, and could not be there. She had a daughter of her own who was pregnant and also ended up having a miscarriage while she was in jail. So she was not there to console her daughter when she was going through that tragic life event. It keeps on compounding when her son, who had just had the twin grandsons, brought the twin boys to jail to see her for the first time. One of the officers recognized him and said, "There's a bench warrant for your arrest," which means they claimed that he had not appeared in court on another incident in another county and arrested him. So while he's there with the grandsons, showing them to her at the visitation, he gets arrested. As if that's not bad enough, 24 hours later, the other county said, "Well, we can't find a warrant for you. I don't know why they arrested you. You're free to go." So here you have a bad arrest compounded with her son's bad arrest, and it just kept compounding. In frustration, the day that he got arrested, she hit a brick wall in the prison and broke her hand. When they took her for medical attention, they said the hand was fractured, but it was too swollen to put a cast on it, and she was supposed to return days later. They never took her back, and she still has problems with that hand to this day. So it's one of the most tragic cases of everything that could go wrong did.
I'm reminded, perhaps just because I've seen the film very recently, of a film called Green Book, which tells a story of the concert pianist Don Shirley, who was African American, and his choice of a an Italian from Queens to be his bodyguard, and they go down through the south for this tour that he very much wants to do. And they are the victims of a stop and search, which results in him being sent to jail for a number of hours before he happens to phone the Attorney General of the United States, who happens to be Bobby Kennedy. She obviously couldn't do that, but is she very angry now with the system?
I'll tell you, in all honesty, it's surprising how well she is doing, how well she has adjusted, considering all that happened to her. I've spoken with her several times about this, and she's had a couple of interviews about it, and her spirit can't be broken. She laughs about it because she says that's all she can do is laugh about it. If she didn't, it would be too much. But she's obviously extremely disenfranchised with what has happened. She wishes that this will never happen to anyone else. She's asked repeatedly if they could simply apologize, and no one has.
First for news and more live Premier League football than anyone else. This is BBC 5 Live.
James Freeman is the lawyer for Dasha Fischer, and what he was saying there was that she's asked repeatedly for an apology, and no one has given it to her. It's 3 o'clock. Time for the BBC News with Davinia Ranas.